Nigeria has over, the number we're throwing around is over 200 million people. It is not an easy job to feed over 200 million people. And more people are still going to come by 2050. Nigeria is projected to become, I think, the third largest country in the world. So how are we going to feed those people? That's why we need systems to be in place to ensure that we can actually clearly predict weather information, climate information.
Hello and welcome to the Break It Down podcast by Nigeria Health Watch. I'm one half of your favorite podcasting duo, Asari Ndem.
Oh, I don't know about half. It reminds me of, remember that series, 2.5 Men, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Sorry, so I don't know about half anyway, but yeah, I'm the other co-host, Chibike Alabosa, and today we are diving into a critical topic that really affects all of us, food, because we eat. And essentially it's about agriculture. How do we build agricultural systems that can withstand all of the whole issues around climate? And to explore this issue today, we are really excited to introduce another colleague of ours, Emeka Oguanuo, who is going to be our special host for this special episode. Other episodes are special, but food now.
But yes, this is a special episode. So Emeka speaks to Temitope Adegoroye from Sahel Consulting on the importance of agriculture, its link to nutrition, and what several organizations are doing to improve our preparedness for climate change.
Yeah, welcome to another episode of the Break It Down podcast. This is the Climate Conversation series. On this special episode, we are going to discuss how Nigeria is coping with its agricultural food system to ensure it is climate resilient. And we're joined by a special guest, the managing partner of Sahel Consulting, Temitope Adegoroye. As you know it, we are faced with significant food crisis. The World Food Programme has said that we have over 4 million children that are malnourished in the country. And I hear that most of these figures are in northern Nigeria. It's interesting given that most of our food comes from the north, and you're a sustainability expert. You've led various climate adaptation initiatives. Imagine I am an uneducated farmer in northern Nigeria, maybe Sokoto to be precise, given that temperatures there, can get very high. I think up to 49 degrees. Imagine I'm an uneducated farmer in the north, trying to make sense of the food crisis driven by climate change. Help me understand what the situation is like and how climate change affects food productivity and farming practices, and how your work contributes to addressing that.
Thank you very much, Emeka. Thank you for inviting me. Climate change is very simply put as change in climate. And what that simply means is that there are significant changes in the weather patterns.
Mm-hmm.
What that means also is that we may find it very hard to predict what weather situations we will have at hand at every point in time, and that has significant ramifications for food production. So for a smallholder farmer, for example, as you asked, let's imagine as a smallholder farmer in Sokoto, I already have, of course, my planting season prediction. So I know when the rains are supposed to come. I know when the rains are supposed to go. But with climate change, there is a significant shift in that. So I can no longer predict when the rains will come or go. That has significant impact on, crop production in itself, without even talking about productivity. So it's a shift and significant fluctuations in the weather patterns, which of course have direct impact on your ability to produce food. As a crop farmer, as a livestock farmer, it has significant impact on your ability to predict when feed will be available for your cows. Most of our farmers, the pastoralists, for example, they move their cows, and over various grazing lands to feed the cows, primarily open grazing. That's what they practice. And the challenge with climate change would force many of them to now move further than they could ever imagine. Because it means that many of the grazing lands that they have access to in the northern part of the country will be so dry, and will be dry for a very long time as well, longer than what they've usually experienced or longer than they've predicted. And that's what climate change really is. That's directly linked to food insecurity. And from there, that's also directly linked to, malnutrition and, all other nutrition related challenges. That has significant ramifications on public health and the health of people. So this is how climate change impacts the food ecosystem and in turn, affects our health. It's high time we started to have these conversations and, encourage farmers to really understand what the concept of climate change is, because it's not just saying, oh, there is climate change and you need to go, practice climate adaptation or climate mitigation. The first thing is that a smallholder farmer who probably is not as technically, sound, or who is not as literate as us, what does it really mean to them? But in simple terms, that's what it means. It is the inability to predict weather, right? Because they're not following the normal routine that we used to know, prehistory.
Yeah, and Sahel Consulting, of course, is at the forefront of leading initiatives to adapt to the warming climate, especially for the agri stakeholders. And how is your work contributing to addressing this?
One of the primary things to address regarding climate change is to ensure you have a very responsive early warning system.
Right.
And for every country in the world, the activities of various actors, both government or development partners or the private sector, those activities are gearing towards addressing the early warning. What is early warning? Early warning is the framework that helps you to actually prepare ahead of time. So you know what could happen and you already have the system in place. You have the structure in place to respond immediately it happens. So early warning is basically what you have in place before climate change struck, or before you have issues with climate change, and it helps you to actually respond. And at Sahel Consulting, what we're trying to do is to really help to structure or coordinate that early warning response system in Nigeria to ensure that Nigeria is in a better position to respond to any climate issues if they arise. That, I think, is very fundamental to really addressing the issues of climate change. Without that, the country is not going to be able to respond.
Absolutely, so that you don't go in blind. And it's interesting how you've explained that farmers, smallholder farmers especially, who make up the significant proportion of our farmers on the continent, are aware of these various ways climate change leads to reduction in food productivity, right? The drought and all of that. They can see it, they can feel it. I mean, someone who is a herder who leads his cattle, his cows across the country, he feels the effect of the changing climate, right? But I'm curious to know what their perception of it is. Perhaps they might not even use the term climate change. Of course, you engage because of your work with some of these stakeholders you support. What's their usual perception of this problem?
I think farmers know that there are changes in climate or in climatic conditions, and they know that it's becoming more and more difficult to predict the weather patterns. What they may not likely say is call it climate change.
Right.
They, of course, would know. They can tell you very clearly that, look, things are not the way we used to. For example, our soils are not giving us enough, nutrients for the crops anymore. Oh, because of that, we need more fertilizer. Or, we don't have enough rain anymore. So because of that, it's very difficult for us to plant, especially crops that will stay on the field for so long. So they understand these different things. For example, they can tell you that, areas where we used to actually go graze our cows, we can't go there anymore. Exactly. Because the grasses dry out very quickly. And they will tell you, well, what we have to do is probably to move them from the north down south to, ensure that they have access to grazing lands. So they have different ways of managing, what could, seemingly look like the effect of climate change. But what they don't understand is why is it climate change and what actually led to that process. Maybe we don't necessarily have to, bore them with the science behind climate change and the technicality of it. I think the most important for a smallholder farmer or to an agribusiness working in this space is really to help them prepare ahead in case something happens. How can they possibly respond, and how can they manage the situation? Because I mean, it's with smallholder farmers. We're talking about smallholder farmers who, of course, I agree with you, they make up about 85-90% of our food production.
That's large.
It's quite large.
Yeah. But
there are also agribusinesses whom I like to call smallholder farmers the food heroes, because they produce most of the food we eat. I'm also executive chair to African Food Change Makers, which is a non-profit organization, sister company to Sahel Consulting. And at AFC we call agribusinesses change makers, right? Because they are the ones who actually stand right in the gap. They receive the produce from the farmers, they add value to the produce before the consumers can actually consume them. So many of them either play in primary production, or they play in processing, or in logistics and all whatnot. They are everywhere, and they make the bulk of the SMEs, right? They need access to climate information as well, because they have to also predict their businesses. I mean, what is going to become of a poultry farmer in, say, Bayelsa or Delta State, who would lose his entire birds because of one single rainfall? And that's probably because he didn't know that the rain was going to come, or if the rain was coming and he knew, he didn't know to what extent or to what devastating extent the rain would happen. So across the board, all of these critical actors, whether the agribusiness player or the smallholder farmer, they need access to the right information. It is with the information that they can plan their agricultural production activities to ensure food security.
I totally agree. And what I'm also thinking about now is that the early warning system, like you mentioned, that can help them predict or monitor the changing weather patterns as it affects their business. A lot of them don't have access to this technology, right? And that's the gap I see Sahel is trying to help bridge. But will it be safe to assume that they don't also have their local ways of adapting to the changing weather patterns, because they've been experiencing this for quite a while? And I think you alluded something very similar by saying, the cattle grazers, right? They know how to guide their pastures or their flocks or their cows through the right terrains, or to access the vegetation they need, something like that. I'm not sure I know the terms. So it's sort of like their own unique ways of adapting to the warming climate. How much of those are you seeing, and how much impact do they have? How are we learning from such local innovative practices, if I'm to say? Because it's local doesn't really mean it's not an innovation as well, or it's not effective, right? How much are we learning from them? And how much are we, making that local insight, available, and integrating it with more advanced systems like the early warning system that you mentioned?
Absolutely. The practices of the farmers are quite adaptive, over the years. They are smart, and they probably know their venture much better than we do. They've done this over and over again, many years over. And they've seen that if it's not working this way anymore, then we need to consider this way. They've considered all manner of traditional practices, crop rotation, intensification, at various degrees. So they've considered a number of things. Definitely it works, but is it going to work at the scale that we need to achieve food security? Nigeria has over, the number we're throwing around is over 200 million people. It is not an easy job to feed over 200 million people, and more people are still going to come by 2050. Nigeria is projected to become, I think, the third largest country in the world. So how are we going to feed those people? So that's why we need systems to be in place to ensure that we can actually clearly predict weather information or climate information, to ensure we have the right data to interpret and come up with the right information that can actually go directly to smallholder farmers and to all the agribusiness players. There is a national framework for climate, But how do we integrate the activities of other actors like the private sector into that framework? How do we ensure that that national framework actually, is entrenched and institutionalized? And how do we ensure we implement what the framework says? Then people have information at their fingertips to make very clear decisions on, what to do and what not to do in agriculture and food systems. And that's what we're trying to do, to see how we bring all of these actors together in the public sector, understand who is supposed to be playing what role. The end is to ensure that we have accurate, credible climate information that could be used for decision making, either by policy makers or by private sector investors in agriculture, in health systems, or by smallholder farmers who are producing on the farm.
Yeah, so many moving parts that would come together to, cumulatively move the needle in increasing our food production, right, or making Absolutely. It more, making our agricultural practices more climate resilient. So you mentioned this, the National Climate Framework, right, and organizations that come to mind are those like NIMET, the Nigeria Meteorological Agency, that produces the weather forecasts. And of course, there's the National Council on Climate Change, NCCC, that works at the high level policy angle, right? But so this really speaks to public-private partnerships, which Sahel Consulting is very well involved in. And of course, you mentioned making this framework effective, right? Ensuring it serves its purpose. So how has those such partnerships with the government entity, the private sector, and of course, your target audience, the farmers and other key players, what kind of experience have you seen from the PPP models that you've implemented to sort of like achieve impact within this space?
Earlier this year, we launched a new initiative called Building Agricultural Systems Resilience against climate shocks.
All right, I think I saw that on your website.
Right,
yes.
And it's within that program that we, started to think through how we can support the development of national early warning systems or frameworks for Nigeria to be able to better respond to the to climate change, related issues. I see it from two broad perspectives, right? The first perspective is from the supply side. So when I say supply side, I'm looking at where climate information come from. Who is responsible for generating climate information? So we want to build early warning response, but we need to understand where is information coming from. And in that supply side, it's heavily loaded with lots of government activities. You mentioned we have NCCC. NCCC works directly within the office of the president and directly responsible for advancing the climate agenda in Nigeria, implementing climate, related agenda in Nigeria in line with, in line with COP and some of the resolutions that all of the various countries have made, as well as NIMET. Now, we have NIMET, we have the Federal Ministry of Environment, we have a number of government ministries that are responsible for generating climate information. So NIMET, for example, probably has the most extensive climate infrastructure, weather infrastructure in Nigeria. NIMET is an agency of the government within the Ministry of Aviation, not agriculture, not health. They work primarily within aviation. And because, of course, in aviation, you need a lot of data, not just data, but accurate climate data to predict what the climate and weather patterns are going to look like because of the flights, right? Of course, we have the Ministry of Environment that also generates some climate data, right? But outside of NIMET and Ministry of Environment, we also have a number of organizations on the demand side of data. Now, that's one is supply side, the other one is demand side. On the demand side of data, we have the Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security, right? We have the Ministry of Health. We have NEMA, the National Emergency Management Agency. We have NISA. So we have a number of institutions of government that are responsible for obtaining climate information from either NIMET or the Federal Ministry of Environment, decoding the information and trying to make the data into useful,
actionable
insights for you and I, or farmers or agribusiness actors to use. What we need to do is to ensure that each of those institutions, whether on the supply side of climate data or on the demand side of climate data, have the right institutional capacity to generate and interpret, and that they have the right systems and partnerships at the national level to ensure that the information gets to the users of the information. So in a nutshell, that's what we're trying to do on our program. The infrastructure that generate climate information, they're called MET stations, or meteorological stations, or agro-meteorological stations in agricultural terms. Those agro-meteorological stations are situated in various places to capture climate information. NIMET harvests the data generated by those systems, and then they can analyze the data internally to then provide data for people who want to use it. Within the program, we're trying to support NIMET to establish more MET stations across a few additional local government areas where they currently do not have infrastructure capacity to be able to actually build that scale. Now, on the demand side of climate data, of course, we need to ensure that the right understanding is there between the Federal Ministry of Agriculture, between NEMA and NIMET, so that they can easily share climate information. But the likes of the Ministry of Agriculture must explore the right collaboration and partnerships. And if I receive unsolicited calls or messages during political campaigns from politicians I don't know about, telling me to vote for someone, why can't I receive climate information or weather information to say, look, the onset of rain is going to be on so date, prepare. Or we're expecting flood to hit Bauchi State or Sokoto, or I'm using those as examples, and then ensuring that we have the right community level systems to transmit this data to farmers, or farmers receive this as text message on their phones in their local languages. Then they know that, okay, this area is likely going to be flooded. Maybe if I've not planted, I shouldn't plant. If I've planted already, maybe I need to make some structural adjustment on my field to ensure that flood won't wash my field away. And that's where we're getting to. We need to get to that point where every Nigerian, and more specifically when we talk about agriculture and nutrition and health, farmers and agribusinesses can actually have access to this information readily, and they can use the information to make business decisions, to make production decisions for food.
Yes, definitely. Wow, that's you said a whole lot there that would need to unpack. Unfortunately, I can't take as much as I would have loved to. Would have loved to continue the conversation. There's still a whole lot I would like to discuss. Hopefully, we can do this next time. But I have a very keen question, which is very closely linked to the conversation about data. Harvesting useful, valuable, actionable insights and making them available to the stakeholders that need them, and the farmers and everyone who can take a decision, which is research, right? They are one of the moving parts or the key players here. And maybe just in a quick one, what has been the role of our research institutions, right, in providing valuable scientific evidence to inform our sustainable farming practices in line with some of the issues you've just mentioned now?
Research has been playing significant roles. We cannot underplay the important role of research. But agricultural research in Nigeria is plagued by a number of challenges, chief of which I think there are issues around the accountability framework for research itself, and that level of coordination that the National Agricultural Research System requires to ensure that we're holding specific research institutions accountable to what. But there is also an issue of funding. They are grossly underfunded, and I conducted some research a few years back at Sahel Consulting to understand how to reorient the future of agricultural research in Nigeria. and some of the findings were very worrisome, because we saw that the bulk of the financing or funding going to research institutions is coming from the government of Nigeria. That is not acceptable. There is no other part of the world where you have very strong research systems that the government is the primary funder of research. It's supposed to be the private sector. And the private sector would only fund research when they feel or they see that the research is result oriented. So there is no way a business practitioner, or I operate a farm and I need maybe improved seeds that are drought tolerant because of the issues of climate change. Of course, climate change has brought prolonged drought period. So typically you want to plant drought resistant or drought tolerant seed varieties to ensure that even where there is very limited amount of water during the growing period, the crop is able to survive it, because it's codified within the gene of the seed to be able to survive in very little water. Now, if I don't see that very clearly, if the research institute is telling me, look, this is a drought tolerant variety, and I don't see that it's drought tolerant, or I've tried it the first time and I realize that it's just scam, I'm not going to go back. The ability of the research institutions to really provide demand-driven research that directly address specific issues or challenges in the production system is very important. And it's until then that the private sector would have confidence in research institutions to fund them. So I just try to provide a solution to the funding issue. Many times there is no adequate transfer or clear framework to transfer the beautiful research results or findings from the research institutions to the farmers or to the users,
and they end up in dusty shelves.
Exactly. So the challenge there is that we've had very beautiful periods in the year in the history of Nigeria where we had very strong responsive agricultural extension delivery system, where you have extension agents, extension officers of the government take these innovations from the research institutions and pass them to the farmers. But that era is gone. Of course, one thing has led to the other, and it's led to the collapse of the national agricultural extension system.
Wow. When we need it.
When we need it the most. And we're feeling the heat now with the food crisis.
Yeah.
So why I've said that era is long gone, where when the government really directly supports extension, is because Nigeria is huge. We're a lot of people. We are in a food crisis. So I believe that we need to start to think about extension service delivery in a different way. And I think what needs to happen is, again, another collaboration or partnership. I think it's high time the research institutions started to explore collaboration opportunities with the private sector. Why am I saying private sector? There are several private sector organizations, companies working in agricultural production or food production in Nigeria that have explored and demonstrated a number of service provision models to farmers. So, I don't want to mention names, but there are very specific companies that have extensive backward integration programs where they identify farmers and farmer groups in various parts of the country. They integrate those farmers into their supply chains. They form them into groups or clusters, and they start to work with them within those clusters. They teach them what to do, how to do it best, how they can adopt the right practices, and they ensure that they deliver the produce to their factories for them to process into high-end products.
Right.
Within the framework of those service provision models, extension can actually be integrated. So it means that the research institutions, if you want to get directly to the farmers, the best ways to do that nowadays is actually to interact or form partnerships with those private companies who already have millions of farmers within their network anyway.
Great. I like that you've been very vocal about solutions that work and that can be scaled up. You've done this at your Changemakers conference, and you also have one coming up this month, just like the Nigeria Health Watch Future of Health conference coming up this month as well. Interestingly, it happens to fall on the same day. And I'm also very grateful. We're entirely very grateful to you that you've been very vocal and spot on this show. So this is now our closing segment where we'll ask 3 questions. I have 3 questions for you. Really, you could answer within 60 seconds.
I'll be brief.
Excellent. So the first one is, if you could enact one universal law that everyone in the world could follow that would help address the climate crisis, what would it be?
I think I would enact a law to unlock innovative investments in massive infrastructure development for early warning for climate, because it requires huge investments. I mean, that's why we're currently exploring public-private partnerships with NIMET and many private companies to come together to be able to establish more meteorological stations and all whatnot. I think countries of the world need to commit more with deliberate action in investment. And I think those investments doesn't follow the same principle of, the bank is going to borrow you X money, you're going to get this back. I think this requires some direct executive order to unlock innovative blended finance instruments to ensure that countries, particularly African countries, I'm very passionate about Africa's development. Africa countries can invest in very massive infrastructure development to address the issues of climate change.
Excellent. So climate financing for infrastructure development,
Absolutely.
Unlocking in the agri value chain. The next question is, if you could recommend a guest for us to come and give a very intellectual conversation just like you've had now to help us unpack the climate change and health nexus, more areas that needs to be discussed, who would it be? And what question would you ask the person?
There are many wonderful individuals in this space.
I'm sure they are.
But I think I would recommend Dr. Michael Ojo. Dr. Michael Ojo is the country director of the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition in Nigeria, GAIN.
Wow.
GAIN sits right in the middle of the nexus between food systems and nutrition, and most of the work they do actually directly address issues around how climate change is impacting food systems, and I would probably like him to come talk about how we can achieve sustainable healthy diets in the face of climate change.
Absolutely. We've been placed as under the serious hunger category by the Global Hunger Index, and the conversations you've really helped us have here now is it's been very helpful for me personally. I love food, I love agriculture, and to help me better unpack and understand the situation we are dealing with, the food crisis, where it is most felt, and it's really an eye opener knowing that we're doing something about it. Thank you so much for taking your time. I know you have a very busy schedule.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure to be here.
And that brings us to the end of today's episode on building climate resilient agricultural systems. A big thank you to our special host, Emeka Oguanuo, for expertly steering the conversation and breaking down such a complex yet urgent issue.
Absolutely. So from strengthening local food systems to supporting climate-smart farming practices, it's very clear that resilience in agriculture is not just about survival, it is about creating a healthier and more sustainable future for all.
Yeah, true. Very, very, very true. And we really hope today's discussion gave you some insight into, different ways that individuals, communities, policymakers can take action. Because essentially, at the end of the day, the question is, what should we do? Because when we understand the issues, we are better equipped to demand and also drive change.
All right. So don't forget, if you enjoyed this episode, please like, share, subscribe, and leave us a review. You can listen to more episodes of Break It Down wherever you get your podcasts, and of course on the Nigeria Health Watch YouTube channel.
Absolutely. And really want to hear your thoughts on this beyond sharing. Please, the reviews, actually said, very important. But importantly, we also want to know how these things affect you. Do you even know what climate change is? And here is an interesting one. What do you think, or what do you call climate change in your local language? I think this is something I came across. Yeah. So what is it really to you? Or, all these conversations we're having around climate change, you think, like someone said on Twitter one time, waiting concern us with climate change. But yeah, very interested to know. But until then,
let's keep breaking it down.
Yes. Bye-bye.